The US government is set to commence flights transporting migrants to Guantanamo Bay. This is the headline from the Wall Street Journal as the Trump administration aims to increase the detention capacity there from 120 to 30,000 immigrants. The controversial migrant detention centre, operational since the 1990s, has drawn criticism for its conditions and treatment of detainees. This takes me back to a conversation we had in this country, in Australia, throughout the late 90s, which was what to do about, as they were referred to, boat people, illegal asylum seekers who were trying to arrive. They were paying people smugglers to take really risky journeys where many people lost their lives. And for quite a long time, it was a hugely controversial deal to be sending them to places like Christmas Island, Nauru, where the Australian government built detention centres, which essentially was offshore for processing to make sure that they didn't have the rights that the UN gives them if they arrive at a mainland. And as you can imagine, those on the left said this is inhumane and goes against what the UN is saying. Those on the right, and then eventually on the left, said, well, we're trying to save lives because people shouldn't be taking these journeys, and most people should be arriving by plane if they have legitimate asylum seeker questions. But it did lead to many say that a lot of people were left squandering for a very long time. Having children in these detention centres became hugely controversial, but it does seem that the US and the UK as well are having the same debate that Australia had about 15 years ago. And we went through this period, Veronica, where the Liberal National Coalition would get in and they would bring back offshore processing, and then the Labor Party would get in and they would ditch it. Eventually, the left got on board and realised it may not be what they want, but it was the only thing that worked.
So for people who may not be familiar, what was the end result?
Well, right now there are detention centres and processing centres that are occurring, and we have fewer boats that have arrived. Of course, whenever there is a policy brought in that questions the legitimacy, the people smugglers straight away jump on and they start selling tickets on these dodgy, risky boats to cross over the straits, and we have seen people die. I remember during the Gillard government where she started to roll back some of the policies of the Liberal government, and a boat arrived smashed up off the shore, and all of those people were killed. And all of a sudden, sentiment changed from one being about controversy and became one of there is no other choice, and that's where the policy stands. And in fact, the former Australian Prime Minister, Tony Abbott, has found himself in the UK actually advising the British government on what to do, and that's where they have been following a very similar path and similar controversy to what we're now seeing in the United States.
And as you mentioned, it's something that a lot of countries do struggle with. And so when we're seeing these migrants, we've been told by this administration, also the border czar, Tom Homan, who's been leading the effort, of course, now the new Director of Homeland Security, Secretary Kristi Noem, that right now this first phase, it's the worst first. So they're looking for the criminals, and not just those who have crossed into the United States illegally. Of course, that counts as a crime, but they're talking about the ones who are, running the drugs, the fentanyl, the illegal arms, human trafficking. So these are the types of people that they are going to be moving to Guantanamo Bay. It's also very interesting, or potentially even noteworthy, that during President George H.W. Bush and also Bill Clinton, they had some 50,000 Haitians and Cubans who were housed in Guantanamo Bay in 1991 through 1996 as they were waiting until they were allowed into the United States. So it's not something that hasn't been done. It's not something that's new. And so we are being told that those, first flights have been, taking off so far to see this, new type of situation unfold.
Yeah, so Australia is still sending asylum seekers, these refugees, to Nauru for processing if they arrive in Australia. And it was Papua New Guinea as well. It's now Nauru. Now, on the downside, it costs about $1 billion a year. It's pretty expensive and will be even more expensive for Guantanamo Bay, as we know. But also, it has been controversial because of the UN Human Rights Council describing it as an indictment, a damning indictment on Australia's international obligations. Now, this comes at a perfect time because today, President Trump signed an executive order essentially ending United States support for the UN HRC, the Human Rights Council. This is a huge deal. I would say that of all of the things that have happened over the past couple of weeks, this is one of the big ones. Here's Donald Trump.
So I've always felt that the UN has tremendous potential. It's not living up to that potential right now. It really isn't, hasn't for a long time. It has, there are great hopes for it, but it's not being well run, to be honest, and they're not doing the job. A lot of these conflicts that we're working on should be settled, or at least we should have some help in settling them. We never seem to get help. That should be the primary purpose of the UN, the United Nations. And again, it's got great potential, and based on the potential, we'll continue to go along with it, but they got to get their act together.
A really, really strong indictment from President Trump against the UN. I mean, he's spoken about the whole UN there. Obviously, the US isn't pulling out of the UN, but they are coming out of the World Health Organization. They are coming out of the Human Rights Council as well. These are significant bodies that make up the UN. Veronica, as you know, many people, many conservatives in particular, have had a big problem with the UN over, gosh, I don't know, my entire life, I think, where the Security Council has come under a lot of criticism, where Iran being on the Human Rights Council, in fact running it, has seemed ridiculous to many, given their human rights record as well. It feels like the US is paying for a lot, copping a lot of criticism as well, and the organisations have become activist and also very, very political. And now Trump is essentially doing what a lot of conservative leaders have said they would, have wanted to do, but have not done. What do you think?
Absolutely. And this is where we are hearing President Trump say the hypocrisy needs to end. I mean, if you look at the United States, so they would be paying through the United Nations Human Rights Council in terms of aid, and then you are trying to broker peace and still sending aid, for maybe the Middle East, if you're looking at the Gaza situation, for example, to Israel to try to help out. So this is, constant money that's going out. Obviously, a lot was being reported on when there were members who were part of the council's one on-the-ground organization, and they were members of Hamas. And so where is that money really going? And so I think that's, really the root of what you're seeing from this administration for the accountability, and they want the receipts. They want to see what's happening, what's going on. They're talking about, sunlight can be the best disinfectant. I mean, that's also what you're seeing with Elon Musk. And, we are seeing a lot of liberals, a lot of Democrats very upset. And it's saying, well, what's wrong with just having a conversation to say maybe there's a better way moving forward? But, to have this, hysteria over some of these things, it will be okay for sure. But
I'm detecting with Trump a negotiating tactic that you can say is the same as what we've seen with Mexico and Canada, which is to shoot first, ask questions later. Why, playing devil's advocate here, why do you think Trump didn't decide to negotiate with the UN, with the Human Rights Council, with the World Health Organization to say, we're really not happy with the direction, we're really not happy with the WHO? There were legitimate questions about its connection with China in the early days, particularly of COVID, and why it didn't point the finger at China quite strongly. Many say that is because they're funded so significantly by China. But why isn't Trump choosing to negotiate before pulling the pin? He's essentially announcing, signing these executive orders to get out of these things. But we all know that the UN Human Rights Council is still really important. So is the World Health Organization. He wants change, but is it easier to make change from the inside or the outside?
Well, that's going to be something very interesting to see. But if you are cutting off funding, at least from the United States' standpoint, maybe they can fill those gaps and keep going. But, it is a point to say that if you're still a player, you can still be a part of, trying to have discussions about the future and where things go. But I wouldn't discount the fact that President Trump gets, his daily briefings, right? He's also privy to a lot of confidential, top secret information. And so while he may not be obviously talking about that, maybe you can look to some of his actions to see. But I think you're seeing that enough is enough. When he is tasked with really trying to rein in the spending, to try to balance budgets, and to look at what has been done so far. That we have heard these cries that things need to go in a better direction. People are not happy with the information that's coming out. I mean, even outright lies sometimes from the World Health Organization and listening to some of the press conferences and what's being said, people are really shocked and appalled. And so it could be a negotiating tactic to just, pull the funding, let them come back to him and say, okay, now we're willing to have that conversation. That could, definitely be something that's on the horizon.